So hello and welcome again to another episode of The Open Road, the video cast where we examine different aspects of open source community management and best practices around open source communities. My name is Brian Proffitt.
And I'm Rich Bowen.
Yes, and we are pleased to welcome you to this episode where we're going to be talking about onboarding in the sense of who's responsible for it. And Rich, I know this is something that you and I, we talk about a lot because as community architects, it does seem to always, by default fall on us, but that is not always true, especially if you're trying to build a healthy community and disseminate some of the responsibility.
So we talked, first of all, to Sarah Finn, who is the Agile coach for the Community Platform Engineering Group at Red Hat. And she's one of the people that is specifically tasked with this sort of thing, but she had some great thoughts around this question.
That's a great question, Rich. So with onboarding, I would put it down as the entire team's job to ensure that if we're onboarding a team member or we're onboarding a new initiative with a team, that everybody comes together to discuss how they'd like to work together and what makes sense for them as a team, all these different time zones, and also what makes sense to the outcomes of the project as well and what we're trying to deliver. So there's different stages of onboarding. So it's that initial discussion around how that's going to work. And then it's regular check-ins then. So as I said, the retrospectives, the reviews, the planning sessions and so on. What's really important is within that in onboarding as well is for the person to understand the process that the team is working towards, that continuous improvement process, and where everyone fits into that and how that works. So for example, that they understand the makeup, they understand the roles and responsibilities. So within an agile team, we have a product owner, and we have Aoife, which is amazing in CPE. And when a team member is onboarding into a new team, they might have had their own experiences working with other teams that mightn't necessarily had a product owner. They might have had a product manager, or they might have had a product owner who might have been very much fixated on you do Scrum this way and there's no other way of doing it, and dictated how things were run. And you can have those product owners, and that might work for them. So it's important that they know coming in that the product owner is introduced and the roles and responsibilities are there as well, and that it's very much a team effort. So Aoife would expect some input from the team member, and vice versa. The team member would expect some input from Aoife if clarity is required there as well. And also the Scrum Master role is that kind of buffer in between too. So it's that mutual respect and that instilling that shared ownership and shared accountability for what everyone is trying to achieve. So that I said that has stages, and eventually that person would evolve into that role and see where they fit and bring some suggestions themselves on how to improve.
So I think Sarah very much shares my perspective here, is that it's everybody's job. And one concern that I had while listening to this is that if it's everybody's job, then it's nobody's job. And she kind of addresses that in saying that there are certain people who it is actually their job to direct the process and to set the expectations, but that in doing that they enable the whole team to play their individual parts.
Yeah. So what Sarah is describing neatly gets around the problem that some open source projects have, which is the assumption that collaboration means that all voices must be heard, which is true. But then the flip side of that sometimes is all ideas must be implemented.
Right.
That's what it means to be heard, and that is not the case. There's always, and so it's no secret that at Red Hat we are big proponents of the open decision framework, and one of the things that is codified in the open decision framework is who's going to be responsible for making the final decision. Mm-hmm. And Sarah is definitely, talking about that when she talks about the role of product owner and the Scrum Master and everything like that. But I did like the fact that she's still including the rest of their team. She's not laying it all on them. Yeah. I think that's great, because individual team members will always have a piece of the puzzle readily at hand that, not everybody will know. Not everybody knows all of the technical stuff and the cultural stuff and anything that's involved with a project.
Another thing that I noticed in this clip was, so Sarah's a proponent of the agile development method. And if you've ever worked with this particular method, or indeed any other one, you'll have learned that it has different flavors depending on who's implementing it. And she talks about how you come into her team and you may have experienced this method elsewhere and have a different idea of what it means. And it's important to accept the local flavor. It's important to understand that this is the way this team works. And the way that you did it before, that was fine for them, but this is how we do it. And you need to be able to work within that framework and not continually insist on your own personal interpretation.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's important. Because everybody's assuming that onboarding is for new contributors, people who are, fresh out of school, or, just new to whatever technology, regardless. But this applies to veteran contributors too. And in fact, it actually becomes a little bit harder, because I'm sure a lot of us have run into this. Sometimes it's harder to get people to unlearn what they already know, and reapply new skills in whatever project they're working on. And that's a very, very tricky balance, because sometimes what they bring to the table can improve the existing environment. And knowing when to let things go and or adopt new ideas and new strategies is certainly a big part of any kind of community organization. So as we talk about, the agile way of doing things, which, is incredibly pervasive throughout, engineering right now, there are other perspectives on this, and who is responsible for onboarding. So one of the people that we've been talking to in the course of this series is Mary Thengvall, who is the Director of Developer Relations at Carmunda. And we asked Mary the same question, and here's what she came up with.
I honestly think it depends on the size of the team and the roles within that team. We actually are lucky enough at Carmunda, we just hired someone whose title is Technical Community Builder. And they are now taking over all of that, onboarding, expectation setting, making sure that across all of our products, PRs are accepted and merged and communicated around in the same way, rather than, hey, with this product, it's this way, and with this project, it's completely different. And you as a community member might not know that. That being said, it's the first time we've had someone on our team who can really own and shape and grow that area. And so up until then, it's been largely a group effort, with one of our developer advocates who's really excited about the forum and really invested in the forum, doing a lot of that driving from the beginning. So I think it depends on the goals of the group. I think it depends on, again, what roles you have within your team. Ideally, and this is very pie in the sky, we might all get there one day philosophy, but ideally the entire community is helping with that onboarding, right? Everybody's pitching in, and someone joins a new channel and people go, hey, welcome. This is the conversation we were just having, right? And it turns into that very welcoming environment where it's not just, you know, a new name shows up in a channel somewhere, but they're instantly welcomed, instantly felt welcomed by the people in that community. They know how to engage, they know what to do, they know what the processes are, both because of that, you know, how to be a good citizen, welcome to the channel, but also because of the people that are there and are kind of fostering that awesome environment for them.
Well, so Mary very much took the more of the centralized approach to it. And that's, you know, what I was getting at when I intro the question, because in an agile environment, you know, just distribution of responsibilities is much more a part of that process. But for those of us who aren't necessarily doing agile oriented work, centralization of responsibilities is still very much a thing. And I appreciated how Mary basically just said, yeah, we've got a technical person who's going to make sure that everything is consistent.
Yeah, that's what I heard was having one person responsible ensures consistency across different groups. And that, you know, that's something that within the open source program office at Red Hat, a lot of us don't work in just one group. I work extensively with 3 different groups across the company, and then, you know, even other groups in other roles, and every experience is slightly different. And so you end up having to learn different cultural nuances for each one of the groups you work with, and having some sort of consistency would in fact be really nice.
It would, but that is also the nature of the open source beast, as it
is,
were,
yeah.
because we encourage individuality and not a single approach. I think a lot of people get surprised when I say that even within Red Hat, which is, you know, arguably one of the most successful open source, you know, organizations around, we don't always follow open source best practices in a consistent manner. We come at it from every different direction, which is great and part of our culture, but it also can be, you know, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating because of what you just said. You got to relearn everything.
And I have this conversation with folks, you know, within Red Hat. They'll ask, how do I participate in an open source project? And I'll say, well, it depends. What project are we talking about? And they'll tell me, and I'll say, well, you know, in that project, people are like this, but, you know, so yeah, there's a lot of local flavor. There's a lot of local culture.
Exactly. But there are common threads. So, you know, both Sarah and Mary do talk about how, you know, either now or in the future, that the entire team should be kind of responsible in some way, shape, or form of onboarding new participants. And I really do think that is a goal a lot of projects should have, because there's always the technical side of things, like you want to eliminate the bust factor. So if one person is the keeper of all knowledge for onboarding and they leave, you know, that's a problem. So even from a practical standpoint, spreading it out is a good idea. But it also helps kind of lend it. I think it communicates the cultural flavor and the technical flavor much faster if it's coming from a lot of different directions, and spread out. So the next person we talked to was Deb Nicholson, who is currently the acting general manager of the Open Source Initiative. And we put the question to her again, when it comes to onboarding, who's responsible? Is it one person or is it many? And here's what Deb had to say.
That's interesting. I think it depends on the way the project is. And a little bit the size and the way that it's set up. I do think that everybody should feel like, at least like a high five, thanks for coming level of participation in the onboarding process. And if what someone tells you they want to do, they're like, oh, one day I want to set up my own whole project. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, maybe what we do is like kind of the volunteer equivalent of like a cross train where you like,
Okay.
go find out what Rich needs for like a couple weeks. And then we'll move you over here and see if Tanya could use you on what she's up to and so on, and kind of do a rotation and let folks know like, hey, this person is going to be rotating through. You're getting them in July. So like, you know, um, and
Okay.
that can be really good because it gives people more of a sense of the organization, especially I think this is especially key in organizations or projects where one person is there for their work, because they could get like kind of yanked out anytime. And if
Mhm.
the only person that you as a new volunteer are familiar with is the person that gets reassigned or retasked, or they have a baby or they go to grad school or whatever, um you want to make sure that it's not just one person, but it doesn't necessarily have to be every single person at the
Okay.
same investment level. So it might be like, hey, I'm going to loan you over here for a little bit and over here, but so you have more than one contact. But
Mm.
I think having everyone do a little of it, it's hard because again, if you're asking people about their interests, like it might be like, oh, I actually didn't really want to learn to sysadmin. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, maybe, and it turns out our sysadmin doesn't really need a lot of people to shadow like a new one every couple weeks.
So going back to one of our earlier interviews, this clip reminded me that Deb's emphasis is a lot of these things depend on who your audience is, whether they are volunteers or whether they are employees, and that's going to greatly affect how you onboard somebody. And I was amused by her comment about, maybe I didn't want to learn that. So, and that's definitely going to apply to a volunteer more than a employee.
Right, exactly. And setting expectations up front is always good. And Deb has mentioned that again, as you say, in earlier interviews. What intrigued me about this was, and I didn't really notice it until we listened to all three of these together, is that to a person, all of our guests have said, it depends on the size.
Mm-hmm.
And they phrase it in that way or similar. And that intrigued me because are we talking about like at some point it's too big? Like if it's too big, then it can't be everybody anymore. It has to be more centralized. Or is it too, or if it's really small, everybody's busy doing other things and it has to be one person, because I could see it going either way.
Yeah.
But yeah, Deb, I think Deb really did a good, job of kind of walking the middle of the other two guests, because, one said, let's get everybody to do it. The other said, let's centralize and maybe move to everybody later. And Deb's like, no, it's not really going to need to be everybody, but definitely more than one, because like me, she's sort of concerned about, the bus factor. And making sure, information is properly spread out.
So it was that. It was also what I took away from that was that it's important that you expose them to different individuals in the team, mm-hmm. because if all of your onboarding is done by that Brian guy, and that's the only flavor you have of the team, then, later on you'll encounter, that Rich guy, and it'll be jarring because that's not how you learned the team works. And I'm intentionally not throwing other members of our work team under the bus. But, there are some people that if you onboarded with one person, then you might find it jarring to encounter that other personality.
Yeah. And we're we don't even have to really like poke fun at anybody. I mean, even between me and you, our approaches to how we handle problems and view communities are different, to say the very least. I think it's good that they're complementary, but they are certainly very different. And yeah, you don't want a bunch of hand-waving, Van Gogh-loving people running around a community necessarily. So, point well taken. So definitely spread it out. And I think it's a takeaway from all of our guests in some way, shape, or form, as much as you can, try to get as many people involved in the onboarding process as possible to make your life easier.
I also wanted to inject my own anecdote here. In our team, we have this notion of an onboarding buddy, and we just added, we just hired a new community architect. He'll be starting in a few weeks, and I've been assigned as his onboarding buddy. And this is intended to create a safe space where, you strike up a friendship where the newbie can ask the silly questions. And so last night he was like, I'm trying to log on to this mandatory part of my onboarding process, and I simply can't figure out how to do it. And I was like, well, this is the way that you have to do it with your secure token or whatever. And that gave him a way to ask a question that didn't expose him to either an onslaught of unsolicited advice or the potential to look like he didn't know something.
Right. And we, beyond the onboarding buddy process, we do have some documentation for onboarding for our new team members. When I was first hired, a colleague and friend of mine sent me, at that point, it was just basically a big long email that got passed to the new people as they came in. And the subject line was, "Welcome to the Island of Misfit Toys," which pretty much had all the information that we needed along the lines of what you were talking about, and also pretty much summed up our team culture very quickly. Because I think that is probably the most apt description of all of us. But that kind of thing is helpful, and that helps get around the scaling problem, and certainly consistency of information problem. If you get it written down somewhere, you have a reference that's available for people in case the onboarding buddy is not available, or there are different ideas that maybe, you as the onboarding buddy don't know, and somebody else has figured it out. So documentation is always helpful.
Well, that one was fun. And, we look forward to continuing this journey through my different beard lengths as we look at these different clips. And we appreciate you all listening and watching.
All right. So with that, thanks again for watching another episode of The Open Road. My name is Brian Proffitt.
And I'm Rich Bowen.
And have a great and safe day.